Okay, should be live any second now. Wait for YouTube to catch up to itself. There we go. Let's go ahead and hop in. So we are here. We're discussing Witt's thoughts. That'd be Charlotte Witt's thoughts. All right. It is important to clarify the notions of gender and social individuality that Witt employs. First, gender is a social position that, quote, clusters around the engendering function. Women conceive and bear, men beget. Witt, 2011a, page 40. These are women and men's socially mediated reproductive functions. Witt, 2011a, page 29. And they differ from the biological function of reproduction, which roughly corresponds to sex in the standard sex-gender distinction. Witt writes, quote, to be a woman is to be recognized to have a particular function in engendering. To be a man is to be recognized to have a different function in engendering. End quote. 2011a, page 39. Second, Witt distinguishes persons, those who possess self-consciousness, human beings, those who are biologically human, and social individuals, those who occupy social positions synchronically and diachronically. Synchronically and diachronically. Synchronically at the same time and diachronically not at the same time? I'm not sure what that means. I'll have to look those words up. These ontological categories are not equivalent in that they possess different persistence and identity conditions. Social individuals are bound by social normativity, human beings by biological normativity. These normatives, normativities, there we go. These normativities differ in two respects. First, social norms differ from one culture to the next, whereas biological norms do not. Second, unlike biological normativity, social normativity requires, quote, the recognition by others that an agent is both responsive to and evaluable under a social norm, end quote. Witt, 2011, A, page 19. Thus, being a social individual is not equivalent to being a human being. Further, Witt takes personhood to be defined in terms of intrinsic psychological states of self-awareness and self-consciousness. However, social individuality is defined in terms of the extrinsic feature of occupying a social position, which depends for its existence on a social world. So, the two are not equivalent. Personhood is essentially about intrinsic features and could exist without a social world, whereas social individuality is essentially about extrinsic features that could not exist without a social world. So, in my head, I don't know if I'm fully getting this. In my head, I'm sort of saying to myself, like the notion of a godparent, for example. You need a society to have a godparent, because godparent is something you can be, but only in the context of a social world where, like, godparents are, like, an existing social function. I think that's what we're getting at here. That's my guess. Which gender essentialist argument crucially pertains to social individuals, not to persons or human beings. Saying that persons or human beings are gendered would be a category mistake. But why is gender essential to social individuals? For Witt, social individuals are those who occupy positions in social reality. Further, quote, social positions have norms or social roles associated with them. A social role is what an individual who occupies a given social position is responsive to and evaluable under. Witt, 2011, page 59. However, qua social individuals, we occupy multiple social positions at once and over time. We could be women, mothers, immigrants, sisters, academics, wives, community organizers, and team sport coaches, synchronically and diachronically. Now, the issue for Witt is what unifies these positions so that a social individual is constituted. After all, a bundle of social position occupancies does not make for an individual, just as a bundle of properties like being white, cube-shaped, and sweet do not make for a sugar cube. Just as a bundle of properties like being white, cube-shaped, and sweet do not make for a sugar cube. I have a feeling that there might be someone out there who might disagree with this, depending on what level of skepticism you're operating under. For Witt, this unifying role is undertaken by gender, being a woman or man. It is, quote, a pervasive and fundamental social position that unifies and determines all other social positions, both synchronically and diachronically. It unifies them not physically, but by providing a principle of normative unity. 2011a, pages 19 through 20. Oop, too far. By, quote, normative unity, unquote, Witt means the following. Given our social roles and social position occupancies, we are responsive to various sets of social norms. These norms are, quote, complex patterns of behavior and practices that constitute what one ought to do in a situation, given one's social positions and one's social context, unquote, Witt, 2011, page 82. The sets of norms can conflict. The norms of motherhood can, and do, conflict with the norms of being an academic philosopher. However, in order for this conflict to exist, the norms must be binding on a single social individual. Witt then asks, what explains the existence and unity of the social individual who is subject to conflicting social norms? The answer is gender. Gender is not just a social role that unifies social individuals. Witt takes it to be the social role. As she puts it, it is the mega-social role that unifies social agents. First, gender is a mega-social role if it satisfies two conditions, and Witt claims that it does. 1. If it provides the principle of synchronic and diachronic unity of social individuals, and 2. It inflects and defines a broad range of other social roles. I'm just going to look these words up real quick. Just at the same time. Synchronic, concerned with something, especially a language, as it exists at one point in time, often contrasted with diachronic. Concern with the way in which something, especially language, has developed and evolved through time. Okay, so a point in time versus through time. Okay, so snapshot versus sort of cinema, I guess. If it provides the principle of synchronic, meaning at a singular point, and diachronic, through unity of social individuals. Okay. So gender is a mega-social role if at both a particular point in time and through time it provides for the unity of a social individual. And 2, if it inflects and defines a broad range of other social roles. Certainly, again, I don't know if this is where they're going with this, but I can kind of see that the genders of man and woman kind of qualify or shade or color just about every other interaction. I mean, you can talk about, academic philosopher, but that looks differently kind of and is flavored by being a man or a woman. You can even see the way the energy in a room changes. If you have a group of all men in a room and a woman enters the room, you can see they sometimes sit a little differently. They sit up a little bit more. They'll often turn to face the woman. All kinds of like little categorizations. On a date, for example, who opens the door? How do you know who opens the door for the other person? Obviously, that's a little old-fashioned now in some ways, but it's still, everything is contextualized through the lens of gender. I don't know if that's what this is getting at necessarily, but at the moment, that is what I think they're saying. Gender satisfies the first and usually being a lifelong social position. A social individual persists just as long as their gendered social position exists. Further, Witt maintains, trans people are not counterexamples to this claim. Transitioning entails that the old social individual has ceased to exist and a new one has come into being. And this is consistent with the same person persisting and undergoing social individual change via transitioning. Okay, so she's saying the human being, the person persists. The social individual is sort of passes away and then a new one comes into being through the process of transitioning is what Witt is claiming here. It's interesting. I'll need to think on that one. And this is consistent with the same person persisting and undergoing social individual change via transitioning. Gender satisfies the second condition, too. It inflects other social roles, like being a parent or a professional. The expectations attached to these social roles differ depending on the agent's gender, since gender imposes different social norms to govern the execution of the further social roles. Now, gender, as opposed to some other social category like race, is not just a mega-social role, it is the unifying mega-social role. Cross-cultural and trans-historical considerations support this view. Witt claims that patriarchy is a social universal, 2011, page 98. By contrast, racial categorization varies historically and cross-culturally, and racial oppression is not a universal feature of human cultures. This is, I'm not a historian, but as I understand it, this is this is true, that in a lot of ways our modern conception of race is a very contemporary modern notion that doesn't extend back that far. So if you sort of take a look at sort of like old-timey ways, people have always divided each other up, but it used to be more nationality-based rather than skin color-based. People have divided each other up in all kinds of ways throughout time and space, and our modern conception of just like skin color as being like the way to divide people up, as I understand it, is relatively recent. There have been other forms of oppression. There have been religious oppression that show up in cultures. You can have ethnic oppression, cultural oppression, national, the oppression of a certain national group throughout time and space. But there have been cultures that really didn't have racial oppression in the sense that we think of it nowadays, historically. Although there have been many cultures where that has been the case. Thus, gender has a better claim to being the social role that is unessential to social individuals. This account of gender essentialism not only explains social agents' connectedness to their gender, but it also provides a helpful way to conceive of women's agency, something that is central to feminist politics. 4.2.3 Gender as Positionality. Linda Alcoff holds that feminism faces an identity crisis. The category of women is feminism's starting point, but various critiques about gender have fragmented the category, and it is not clear how feminists should understand what it is to be a woman, 2006, Chapter 5. In response, Alcoff develops an account of gender as positionality, whereby, quote, gender is, among other things, a position one occupies and from which one can act politically, unquote, page 2006, 148. This feels like gender's performativity to me again, a little bit maybe. In particular, she takes one's social position to foster the development of specifically gendered identities or self-conceptions. Quote, the very subjectivity or subjective experience of being a woman and the very identity of women are constituted by women's position, unquote, Alcoff 2006. Okay, maybe this feels more like Witt's position then, or not Witt's position. I've already forgotten who it was that said that it was sort of gender was defined by subordinate and I don't think they used the term oppressive, but that kind of that whoever holds that role in society, sort of that's what defines gender. Unfortunately, I'll need to read through all of this again to really lock it into my brain. Thankfully, it's all captured on YouTube. Alcoff 2006, page 148. Alcoff holds that there is an objective basis for distinguishing individuals on the grounds of actual or expected reproductive roles. Quote, women and men are differentiated by virtue of their different relationship of possibility to biological reproduction, with biological reproduction referring to conceiving, giving birth, and breastfeeding involving one's body, Alcoff, 2006, page 172, italics. I'm guessing, I haven't gotten down here yet, but I'm guessing that part of the problem is what happens. Is this suggesting that someone ceases to be a woman once they hit menopause? That if you're incapable of reproduction, that if you're incapable of giving birth, that you're sort of excluded from the category of woman? Because that feels like a problem. But let's go ahead and continue and see what they say. The thought is that those standardly classified as biologically female, although they may not be able to reproduce, will encounter a, quote, a different set of practices, expectations, and feelings in regard to reproduction, unquote, than those standardly classified as male, Alcoff, 2006, page 172. Further, this differential relation to the possibility of reproduction is used as the basis for many cultural and social phenomena that position men and women. It can be, quote, the basis of a variety of social segregations. It can engender the development of differential forms of embodiment experienced throughout life, and it can generate a wide variety of affective responses from pride, delight, shame, guilt, regret, or great relief from having successfully avoided reproduction. Alcoff, 2006, page 172. Okay, so defined, you don't necessarily have to be reproductively capable, but these genders are defined by their relationship to the reproductive process. So that's what's being said here? Not clear to me yet. Reproduction, then, is an objective basis for distinguishing individuals that takes on a cultural dimension, and it positions men and women differently. Depending on the kind of body one has, one's lived experience will differ. So I think what this person is saying is that historically, the social category of gender was derived from the reproductive capabilities, generally speaking, of males and females. But you can still speak separately of gender from reproductive capability, but it was the nature of woman as being the one who sort of gives birth, and the nature of males as the one who sort of provides the seed, as it were, that sort of derived from those social categories were formed, which sort of take on a life of their own. I think that maybe that's what's being said, which doesn't feel like necessarily, this feels explanatory. This feels like it can still work with a lot of stuff that's already been said here. But let's continue. And this fosters the construction of gendered social identities. One's role in reproduction helps configure how one is socially positioned, and this conditions the development of specifically gendered social identities. Since women are socially positioned in various different contexts, there is no gender essence all women share. Quote, there is no gendered essence all women share, unquote, Alcoff, 2006, pages 147 through 148. Nevertheless, Alcoff acknowledges that her account is akin to the original 1960s sex-gender distinction insofar as sex difference, understood in terms of the objective division of reproductive labor, provides the foundation for certain cultural arrangements, the development of a gendered social identity, but with the benefit of hindsight. Quote, we can see that maintaining a distinction between the objective category of sex identity and the varied culturally and culturally contingent practices of gender does not presume an absolute distinction of the old-fashioned sort between cultured and a reified nature. Alcoff, 2006, page 175. I'll need to think a little bit more on that. That is, her view avoids the implausible claim that sex is exclusively to do with nature and gender with culture. Rather, the distinction on the basis of reproductive possibility shaped by the sorts of cultural and social phenomenon, like the varieties of social segregation, these possibilities gives rise to. For instance, technological interventions can alter sex differences, illustrating that this is the case. Alcoff, 2006, page 175. Women's specifically gendered social identities that are constituted by their context-dependent positions, then, provide the starting point for feminist politics. I'm going to read that last sentence again. Women's specifically gendered social identities that are constituted by their context-dependent positions, then, provide the starting point for feminist politics. On to the conclusion. This entry first looked at feminist arguments against biological determinism and the claim that gender is socially constructed. Next, it examined feminist critiques of prevalent understandings of gender and sex, and the distinction itself. In response to these concerns, the final section looked at how a unified women's category could be articulated for feminist political purposes and illustrated at least two things. First, that gender, or what it is to be a woman or man, is still very much a live issue. Second, that feminists have not entirely given up the view that gender is about social factors and that it is, in some sense, distinct from biological sex. The jury is still out on what the best, the most useful, or even the correct definition of gender is, and some contemporary feminists still find there to be value in the original 1960s sex-gender distinction. Okay, we have finished this entry. I do want to give all the credit in the world to the author of this entry, who I believe is also cited. Yes, I'm going to say either, could be Mary, could be Mari McCullough. Thank you so much for writing this. This was super interesting. I hope everyone enjoyed reading along with me as we went through this. Lots of stuff to kind of unpack here. I need to do some more thinking, and I've got a lot more reading to do, but I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.